Tutorial for My Third Script. In this video, we'll walk through My Third Script and see how it works. This script has all the stages of a basic experiment, starting with consent and ending with a debriefing. We keep each component pretty simple, but this script would make a great outline for your own experiment. We introduce quite a few functions and tools in this script, and we go over them quite quickly, so for more information on any of these topics, take a look at our user manual, which can be found under the guidance section. The first stage is consent. These slashes mean that the computer will ignore the rest of the text on the line because it's a comment. In this script, we use comments to organize each section. In line 2, we make the font size smaller, setting it to 75% of the standard size. Any text we show going forward will be displayed in this size. Note that 75 doesn't need quotation marks around it because it's a number, not a string. The radio function lets you show some text with a drop-down menu of customized options underneath it. We use this to tell subjects that participation is voluntary, then ask whether they'd like to proceed, yes or no. The first argument of radio is the text that we want displayed, written inside quotation marks because it's a string. The second argument is the list of answers that we give the subject to choose between. The list is written as an array, so the options are in square brackets separated by commas, with one more pair of square brackets surrounding the entire array. The options are in quotation marks because they're string. The third and last argument is the label that the subject's response will be saved under. Later, when you look at your experiment's data using the gauge or table icon, each subject will show yes or no under the label consent. The next thing we use is a very important, very useful tool in scripting. It's called an if-else statement. An if-else statement makes the computer read one set of lines if a certain event did happen, and another if it didn't. This lets you decide what happens next in the experiment based on the subject's answer. In line 5, we write an if statement with the condition that the subject's answer to consent was yes. When the computer gets to this line, if the subject chose yes on the previous question, it will perform the steps inside this set of curly brackets, from line 6 all the way down to line 76, which contains our entire experiment. If the subject did not respond yes, the computer would not run anything within that first set of curly brackets. Instead, it would run the script inside the else curly brackets from line 78 to 82. So they work a bit like a flowchart. Based on an event, in this case the subject's answer to the consent question, the computer proceeds down one path or another, but never both. If the subject responded yes to consent, their computer runs them through the experiment. If they responded no, their computer simply shows experiment ended for 2 seconds, then ends. It's not necessary to indent the script inside the curly brackets since white space is ignored by Neurotask, but it is a good way to keep yourself organized. Let's assume that the subject says yes. We move to the next stage of the experiment, the instructions. The instruction function is used to show this text inside the argument, with an OK button for the subject to press when they're ready. Next, you may want to include a practice trial. For simplicity's sake, we don't do that here, but in some experiments, it can be good to give your subjects a practice round so that they're comfortable with the task before you start measuring their results. For the experimental trials, we set the font size back to 100%, so that our words will appear nice and big on the screen. The task itself is the same task from my first script. We show a word for 2 seconds, then a blank screen for 1, repeated until all of our 8 words have been shown. After displaying our stimuli, we set the font size back to 75% for the remainder of the script. Next, we call the large input function, which creates a text field where the subject can type the words they remember and an OK button that they can press when they're done. Like in my first script, the subject's response is saved to our data under the label Words Recalled. In the next stage of our experiment, we ask a few demographic questions. For the sake of variety, we demonstrate 3 different functions here that are useful for asking different types of questions. The first question is asked using the radio function that we used for consent. It asks, "What is your gender?" then gives 4 options in a drop-down menu: female, male, other, and prefer not to say. The subject's response is saved under gender. To ask our second question, we use the select function. This function also shows our options in a drop-down menu, but it's better for numerical answers because instead of having to type out every digit as an option, we can just enter the range. This function displays the first number up to but not including the second number, so this will give 0 to 99 as age options. We ask our third question using the scale function, which displays a Likert scale under our question. That's a row of 5 bubbles with one end labeled very easy and the other labeled very hard. In our data, the subject will have a number 1 to 5 as their answer under the label difficulty, with 1 corresponding to our first extreme, very easy, and 5 corresponding to our second extreme, very hard. A 5-point scale is the default, but you can increase that if you want. For more details, see the Neurotask manual. In line 67, we use the text function in a new way. We give personalized feedback by writing the label names from our previous questions inside curly brackets. The computer will substitute the label name for the subject's actual response. Note that the whole string is still inside one set of quotation marks. This feedback appears for 3 seconds. The last section is the debriefing. You may want to briefly explain your research topic and your hypothesis. This P and /P inside angle brackets puts the text in between them in its own paragraph. This is called HTML formatting. It's an easy way to style text that we'll learn more about in my 8th script. Since some subjects may need more time to read the debriefing than others, we use the await key function. This lets us tell the computer to wait until a certain key is pressed, rather than having to give a specific length of time, like we do with the regular await function. The name of the key goes in quotation marks because it's a string. For other uses of the await key function, see our user manual. When the subject presses the spacebar, the debriefing text is replaced with a thank you message, which lasts for 2 seconds. Then the experiment ends. Remember, lines 78 to 82 are only run by the computer if the subject did not consent to do the experiment. So for the subjects who did consent, the experiment ends here. Now that you understand how my third script works, try changing the questions, the font size, or the timing, and see how it alters the resulting experiment. Have fun!